We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And I guess I should ask, did you watch any of the Olympics yet, Tom?
No, my wife is very upset.
Oh, that you're not watching it, or that you...
Yeah, we did Peacock last time, and it was a debacle, and we were upset. So this time we kind of talked about what we should do, but we never did it. I was going to get YouTube TV. Was the solution to that problem.
Yeah, because they're doing the 4K HDR streaming, although
I'm not worried about that.
That wouldn't particularly matter in your case, but they are. That's one of the places that's doing that.
I may still do that, because she's like, I can't believe we're not watching the Olympics. We are watching Reacher, which is the new Amazon Prime show, which other than getting over the shock that instead of Tom Cruise playing Jack Reacher, you have a WWE wrestler playing. I don't know. I don't know if it is or not, but he looks like it.
I don't know who stars in the series.
I don't know who it is
Reacher,
either.
So,
he walks funny. That's my one criticism of the show. He walks funny. I can't not see it.
Okay.
It's like his arms don't move or something. I don't know. My wife calls him the Terminator, but we like the show, but he walks funny, and it's very distracting.
Okay.
Someone needs to take that man aside and say, all right, dude, we got to work on your walk, because something's up with that. And, I think that overall the acting is pretty good. I like all the other characters. And it's so far I think we're 3 or 4 episodes into it. It's just an Amazon Prime show, so I can't imagine it's got more than 10 episodes, because they never do.
Probably not. Maybe 13 at the most. Popping back to the Olympics for a second, because we did have a listener, David, who just remarked on the opening ceremonies. He said, wow, that was pretty spectacular. And he's like, can we touch upon the projection setup that they used, because the entire floor was lit up and sections of the wall were lit up throughout the opening ceremonies. It's like, it looked pretty darn impressive. So turns out there's articles out there now detailing what they had done for the opening ceremonies, and there were no projectors. Well, I can't say there were no projectors. There probably were some somewhere in the thing, but the main floor that was sort of the spectacle of the thing, that was an LED floor. That was all LEDs. It was over 10,000 square meters of floor, and it was over 40,000 LED modules. I don't know how many actual LEDs, but yeah, they had it's a modular display, obviously, because you can't make something that large and transport it in. So clearly it's modules, but yeah, over 40,000 of them covering over 10,000 square meters. And gigantic, more than 8K resolution LED display on the floor of the stadium. So that's what was going on there. Pretty interesting.
Cool.
I guess to keep the theme of movie reviews, I watched Nobody. That's the one with Bob Odenkirk.
Oh, right. I want to see that.
It is, when you talk about popcorn movie, turn your brain off and just go along for the ride, that's one of those movies. It is definitely enjoyable in that way.
Yeah, it's like a dad, what do they call it? They call it dad revenge porn or something
very
like
much
that.
So.
Yeah.
Very much so. And it suffers a bit from the fact that you can't help but notice the similarities to John Wick, which, it's not as though John Wick was the very first movie to ever do that, but it was so popular at that particular genre, and Nobody is definitely very similar in a lot, to the point that people could these two characters cross over at some point? I mean, it doesn't seem like the world is within
it's
the
like
John
the
Wick
Lethal
world,
Weapon.
but yeah, there's not too much reason why they ultimately couldn't at some point, so they're very similar. But yes, that was enjoyable.
The John Wick cinematic universe. Is that what it's going to be?
Yeah, that's right.
John Wick teams up with other people.
Well, hey, they're going to have the spin-off of aren't they going to do a spin-off with the Halle Berry character? She's going to be...
I don't know.
I
have not liked any of the movies that weren't the first one. The third one was okay-ish, but that's about as far as I'll go. The first one was the only one I really liked. The second one was garbage, and the third one I thought was okay.
But you can certainly watch Nobody. That it's a tight 90. It's not going over an hour and a half, so it checks all the boxes.
That's how I sell movies to my wife these days.
Yep.
I'm like, hey, look at this one. It's under 2 hours.
That's
She's
right.
like, all right, I'm in.
Yep.
All right. Let me see. Do we have anything else to discuss beforehand?
We should get going. We got oodles of questions.
Yeah. We'll get to you all eventually. Don't worry. It's AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater AV questions. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, listen to our previous episodes, and see what questions have already been answered. Not that we won't answer them again, because we do.
We do have detailed show notes. There's timestamps and everything, and if you watch it on YouTube, the timestamps take you straight to the question if you click on them. So, yeah, we got all kinds of handy stuff there in text form.
We do. I know I heard it too, Violet. I don't know what that was. It was probably a squirrel. So, whatever. Dog's been weird. She threw up a bunch last night, so I got to keep an eye on her today.
Okay.
But I'm the only one home, so she's going to follow me around anyways. AVRant.com. Go to Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. You can contact Rob directly. Rob at AVRant.com. His Twitter's at First Reflect. I'm Tom at AVRant.com. My Twitter is at AVRant_Tom. Where are you going? You're just going to switch position.
It's the doggy distraction show.
That's right. Don't worry. She's fine. She curls up in a little ball and goes to sleep. All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, if you support the podcast in some way, one of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which will take you to a PayPal donation site. We want to thank Sean for doing that this week. Sean, who was the star of last week's episode.
That's right. The Sean Show.
He apologizes for asking so many questions last week all at once. He had been agonizing over crafting his email for months. And Sean, I don't blame you. I am going to give everybody, or not everybody, anybody I deem worthy to a hard time. And when you ask that many questions, I'm going to do so. It's all in good fun, and I don't. Just don't ask any more questions.
Well, thank you, Sean, for the PayPal donation. The financial support is very much appreciated, and I put that in there, the mention of his apology email, just because I want everybody to know, like, when a question pops in your mind, just ask it. Like, you don't have to be formal. There's absolutely no reason to be nervous. I know people are. I completely understand it. But there's absolutely no reason to feel that way. There are no dumb questions. Repeat questions are more than fine. Clearly, if you've listened to this podcast for a length of time, so just don't worry about it. But question pops into mind, send it on over. That's the best way.
I think Andrew still has a hard time talking to me. I don't know why. Yeah. He's like, I don't think he gets nervous, but you could tell that.
No, there's that little bit of anxiety. I get that.
He thinks it's weird. He's like, he's been listening to the podcast for years, and suddenly he talks to me in person. It's like, well, you're like this other thing. I'm like, no, I go to the store and talk to people all the time.
Imagine if we were actually like famous in any way. Like,
I know.
It really must be weird.
It must be. I don't know. Yes, Rob's right. If you have a question, just throw it on over. And
shoot it over.
If it's something, Rob will answer it right away, or sometimes even on. I've actually tweeted recently. Mm-hmm. You never know. I might tweet about it. Who knows? We also want to thank our 136 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service. You sign up to become a contributing, supporting, ongoing, money-giving listener person. That's the technical term.
Sure is.
So Patreon, every month they'll take some money from you and give most of it to us, however much you want.
That's right.
So,
Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, our number ticked back up to 136. So big thank you to our 136 patrons over there. And Bertrand, thank you for being one of them.
And if you can't support this podcast financially, we completely understand. Just if you do something to support us, then let us know what you did, and we will mention you. So Karl suggests that, and this is not supporting anything, he's just throwing this out there.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time he suggested this, because he sent me an email about this a while back. And I still haven't done it, but he's not incorrect. He suggests that AV Gadgets have a weekly email newsletter. It would be a helpful reminder to visit and would spotlight the newest posts. And he's right.
Attract some readers, perhaps?
Maybe. Mm-hmm. I personally don't like newsletters. It's a little bit more work. I myself do not like newsletters. Right. Therefore, I do not value them, and therefore it never crosses my mind. But yes, we should do that.
And at least if it is an opt-in and not an opt-out, then they have asked for it. So that's all right. Anything that's opt-in, I'm very okay with.
Yeah. So we also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from a Rohan. Jay, Mike, Gurinder, another Mike, and Bertrand, who's a member of the 2 Hour Plus and 200 Episode Plus Club. He just made that last one up. But
that's right.
He's 2 Hour Plus Club. So thank you, Rohan, Jay, Mike, Gurinder, other Mike and Bertrand for sending the notes of gratitude.
Yep, the names one more time from me: Rohan, J, Mike S, Gurinder, Mike T, and Bertrand. Thank you all very much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us. The notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. So a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions as well.
So the price in the news here, the price of Amazon Prime is going up. It's starting February 18th. New subscribers in the U.S. will have to pay $15 a month, up from $13 a month, or $140 for a full year, up from $120. Existing subscribers have until March 25th. So far, it's only the United States, but don't be surprised if prices go up in other countries soon as well. So
you might want to lock in your current price for the year if you know you're going to keep it and use it, because you at least get the year at the current prices before they tick up. So
I don't know where my subscription ticks over. I'll have to check.
But I'm pretty sure you're allowed to re-up and stack it before the renewal date automatic. So yeah.
Some comments from listeners. Karl, Rob mentioned last week how the NX5, NP5, and NZ7 can end up having a light output advantage over the more expensive models because of the color filter. But Karl wanted to remind everybody the DCI P3 color filter in the JVC NX7 and other models is optional. If you want maximum light output instead of the whitest color, you can simply use a picture mode that does not slide the color filter in place. This is true.
That's true. However, I always feel that people can't resist the temptation,
Right.
The default HDR mode, it's the wide color mode, it's got the filter in place, and it's like one of the reasons people buy the NX7 over the NX5 is to get that, 100% of DCI P3. They just love the look of the spec. So, I feel as though the temptation might be a bit much. But Karl is absolutely correct. It is optional. You do have the ability to not put the color filter in place when you go into HDR mode, and therefore have maximum lumens, but not quite the full DCI P3 100% color.
Nathan went to weigh in on acoustically transparent fabric options from Acoustimac and GIK. He researched it heavily and tried out many options for his own setup. But one thing to keep in mind is that speaker grill cloth is not fire retardant. So depending on your building code rules in your area, covering an entire room or an entire wall with it might not be allowed. On the other hand, all the fabrics sold by Acoustimac are fire rated. Did I say?
Yep.
Was it? I said that right before, right? Because now it's a retardant. Yeah, okay, I said it right. GIK seems to offer a better price on Guilford of Maine than Acoustimac, but he ended up preferring Acoustimac's executive material if you want to upgrade over their standard DMD material. If you want the best bang for buck, he thinks the DMD material is it. He also agrees that the suede that Acoustimac sells is great. He went with it himself, but it is not quite as acoustically transparent as the DMD or executive materials. So if you're going to cover your speakers, it probably isn't the ideal choice. It's totally fine for panels, though. So there you go. There's a little feedback about the different acoustically transparent options, fabric options out there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Nathan's, handled them firsthand, done thorough research on it. Everything he says sounds completely reasonable. I have no reason to doubt any of what he said. And yeah, the fire retardant, the fire rating thing is an important consideration. I had not thought of that when I was talking about it.
Me either.
And he's absolutely right about that. So it's great to know that the basic Acoustimac DMD material really is quite affordable, very acoustically transparent, looks good, is quite opaque in that you won't see what's behind it, and then is also fire rated. So that's a pretty darn good checklist right there.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Joe wanted to share his tale of two recent hard drive replacements. His TiVo Romeo kept shutting down, and that was leading to missed recordings. It was actually very easy to replace the hard drive inside the TiVo with an off-the-shelf drive. It formatted itself to once the TiVo was powered back up, but it meant all of his previous recordings were gone, including lots of Christmas movies that his wife has meticulously cataloged over the years. His other hard drive replacement was in his Kaleidoscape Terra server. It actually sent him an email that one of the hard drives was about to fail, and then it's started flashing warning lights. He had to mail the failing drive back to Kaleidoscape, and they sent a replacement, and it was easy to re-download his movies from Kaleidoscape servers, but it did mean there were a few days of shipping times in between. He wished both devices could offer the best of both worlds, no recordings or downloads lost, but also no wait times with off-the-shelf drop-in replacements. So if you are I don't even think that TiVo thing's still around, right? I mean, can you still buy those things?
Well, there certainly are TiVo devices still around. I'm not sure if the precise model that he has is the current model. I know, like, with my DVR, which I get from my cable company, that if you add an external hard drive to it, it is locked to that unit. So if that external hard drive were to ever die, there's no, like, you can buy an aftermarket one and put it in, but everything's gone. There's no moving that external hard drive to another unit and being able to keep the recordings. It's locked to the unit. So I'm not sure if the TiVo is a somewhat similar situation. I mean, yes, I guess somewhat of a first world problem where you're like, I wish I could have it all. I wish there were no wait time and I lost nothing. That would be ideal, of course, but yeah, I think the Kaleidoscape solution is pretty fair. It is locked to that unit, but you don't lose anything. Your whole catalog is still there for you, so that's pretty decent. And I didn't know you could do an aftermarket swap on the TiVos, but it might be specific to the older models. The newer models might be, all DRM'd up.
As they tend to be. Mm-hmm. Nelson recently checked the battery on one of his UPS, uninterruptible power supply, battery backup units when his power company informed him there'd be a planned outage. Turned out it needed to be replaced. So it was a good thing he checked. Mm-hmm. But while he was at it, he had his oscilloscope out, as one does. Just randomly.
I don't have an oscilloscope. That's something I'm lacking.
There you go. Just think of all the stuff Rob could sell and buy an oscilloscope and probably a car. And just thought it would be fun to share what the stepped approximation from the battery looks like compared to the actual sine wave coming out of the wall. So, so there you go.
That's the original.
If you're looking at you look at YouTube, you can see it.
Yep,
but if you can't,
the original
one is a
wave
wave and one looks like little steps.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yep, the one is very squared and looks exactly like steps. When they say a stepped approximation, it looks exactly like steps versus the very smooth looking original sine wave. So we've got the gaming performance units from APC that we're recommending now. Those claim that they output a pure sine wave, just like what is coming from the wall from the battery. And with, PFC, power factor correction power supplies, which are very common in most of today's PCs and a lot of consumer electronics, they can occasionally have glitches if you're using that stepped approximation. So in general, I think if it's just a matter of giving yourself enough time to shut something down, it's probably going to be okay. But having that pure sine wave, never a bad thing. And now that the APC gaming performance units make it easy to get a hold of, that's something you can do.
Hey, Nelson, you want to be listener of the week? You can let me have these pictures.
Oh, yeah.
AV Gadgets. So if you
permission
send an email
is all you need to say.
With permission, and I would like to have these.
Okay.
Because these are good pictures.
Yeah.
We've mentioned how we're recommending recommending APs. Oh, you already did that. That's already did that. All right. Questions. Sorry. Good pictures.
Yeah.
A little crooked, that one. But the other one, I could fix it. All right. Bob has a 2019 NVIDIA Shield plugged into a Sony X900F TV. He's noticed that when he uses Netflix on the Shield, he sometimes gets a very weird-looking hesitation in the motion. It always looks like random slow motion, and it only seems to happen in dark scenes, and it only seems to happen with Dolby Vision titles. He's tried different output settings on his Shield, but nothing seems to help. If he uses the Netflix app that's built into a Sony, the same scenes have no issues. So any ideas? I'm going to guess that this has something to do with what do you call it? The thing that smooths stuff. What do you call that?
Motion flow in the case of Sony.
Is that
within the settings, within the motion flow settings might be the solution. I mean, it's a little bit tough because Bob is just describing what he's seeing with words, and he seemed to be like leaning towards blaming it on Dolby Vision because he seems to only see it with Dolby Vision titles, but that I can't think of a technological reason why that would be the case, specifically that it's Dolby Vision. Plus, you have the option of the Shield of choosing an output mode that doesn't output Dolby Vision, so I don't know. I mean, if you just rely on outputting HDR10 and never use Dolby Vision, and this problem never appears, I'll call that a perfectly decent workaround because, I mean, it's not Dolby Vision, but HDR10 still looks great on your Sony television. So if that's enough to be a solution, a workaround, then I can easily recommend doing that. But there is the case of like the frame rate matching, right? Between 24 frames per second in the original content versus 60 frames per second, the NVIDIA Shield does not automatically switch between 24 and 60 frames per second. And I have come across some instances where it's a movie. I would anticipate that the original was 24 frames per second, but what is coming from the streaming service isn't necessarily 24 frames per second, even if movies from that same service typically are. It's not as though every single file that gets streamed is necessarily coming out at 24 frames per second. So occasionally, I've found that, yes, setting my streaming device to output 60 frames per second and then relying on, we would call it inverse telecine or reverse 3-2 pull down, where the television is now detecting that from this 60 hertz signal, the original should be in a 3-2 cadence. The original should be 24 frames per second. So the Sony has that. In your motion flow settings, what you would want to turn on is true cinema. That's the setting you would want to use. So not smoothing, not off, but true cinema. That's one of the options for motion flow. If you use the true motion or the true cinema setting in motion flow, and then there is another setting called Cinemotion, which is that reverse 3-2 pull down. It's the inverse telecine. If you set that to high and have your Shield output 60 frames per second, output 60 hertz, the TV is good at doing any detection of if it's like, this is a 60 hertz signal, but the original was 24. If you have that true cinema setting and the Cinemotion set to high, the television detects that and sort of does what it needs to do to force it back to looking like 24 frames per second. So that's your best bet for getting this to look good, even if like the original signal is kind of messed up a little bit, and that might be the case. That might be all it is. Some of these titles, the original signal might be messed up a little bit. But yeah, like I say, the other workaround, if just turning Dolby Vision off in your Shield and relying on HDR10 works, then I would do that.
Right. I guess the only thing I can think is that there's some sort of transcription error that's happening with the Dolby Vision, but it would happen on all the apps, which means that it would have to be app specific.
Yeah.
That the app that you have in the NVIDIA Shield is doing something different than the app in the Sony, which
like the app in the Sony doesn't do 24 frames per second. It only does everything at 60 frames per second. But then if you use the Sony's built-in True Cinema and Cinemotion set to high, then it still looks correct. You still don't get judder that way. So it can be fine to send 60 hertz as long as you have something that does inverse telecine and does reverse 3-2 pull down.
There you go. Jason has a 5.1 setup in this 10 by 20 family room, 10 foot by 20 foot. The aesthetics dictate that he has to use small, attractive wall-mounted speakers in all positions. He upgraded his Polk center speaker to the Polk Signature S35. He absolutely loves it, to the point that he says he's unwilling to part with it for anything else. Mm-hmm. All right, dude.
So that's the center.
That's the center. The rest of his setup consists of Polk T15 bookshelf speakers for the front, left, and right, and Polk RM8s for the surrounds. He recently upgraded to a Martin Logan Dynamo 600X subwoofer, and he loves it so much that he's now considering Martin Logan speakers. So you want Martin Logan speakers, but you can't get rid of your Polk center?
This is the scenario that we're faced with. That's why I put all those details into the description.
Let me tell you, sir, you're not going to like our answer. whatever. No matter what the rest of this question says, the answer is not going to be something that's going to please you. So he wants to upgrade his fronts and surrounds. Atmos is another consideration. He'll be sticking with 5.1. As mentioned, he does not want to even think about replacing his Polk Signature S35 center. So will the Martin Logan 4i and 2i on-wall speakers be a decent match? No, they will not.
I must agree with Tom. The Martin Logan on-wall speakers will not be a good sonic match with your Polk Signature center.
Couldn't I mean, the last time somebody asked me a question like this, they were like, I have what was the center? It was like a B&W, and they wanted to mate it with Klipsch speakers. I was like, no. Like, I am the guy. I am the guy that you can go to and will give you the answer about mixing and matching speakers you want to hear. I am that guy. I am much more willing to suggest that speakers will match better than other people on the internet in particular will just say if it is not the exact line, the exact
brand,
same brand, make and manufacturer. Like, they don't even want you to get like a center that is from a different line,
and that
from
is
the same
a
manufacturer.
shorthand easy answer, because that is a pretty safe bet if you just stick with that.
But I'm the guy who's like, oh yeah, if you've got RBH and you want to match it with the SVS, I'm gonna be like, that's gonna be fine.
Paradigm or Ascend SE series, like anything that's all aiming for neutral, it's gonna be closer than it is far apart. But Logan versus Polk,
no, you need to make a decision, sir. If either you can have Polk full all the way around, or you can have Martin Logan all the way around. So you cannot have both. You must have one or the other. So if you're not even willing to consider getting rid of that center channel, then you have to mate it with Polk speakers. Or I don't really. Every Polk speaker I've ever heard has not been neutral, so I wouldn't even suggest you go with something that was neutral, because I don't think it would match well. So I think you need to stick with Polk.
Yeah, he asked what should he get instead if we don't agree with the Martin Logan Onwells, and I'm a little bit surprised this came up, because you got the Polk Signature Series, and actually I'm a pretty out of the Polk lineup, I'm pretty okay with that Polk Signature Series. Like that's one I really don't mind, and the form factor on that S35 center that you have, that is its big advantage. They went for not very tall because they used multiple smaller drivers going across that center, and it fits where a lot of other centers don't. So I quite like that, and I was like, so let's match it up with some Polk Signature, either satellite or compact bookshelf speakers. The exact same series, the exact same drivers, similarly compact and sleek looks. And I'm like, why wouldn't the Polk Signature bookshelf speakers work for you? I can't fathom a reason, and they do have a keyhole mount on the back, so they are wall mountable. It's not a problem. The S15, the Polk Signature S15, would be the bookshelf model that has the exact same size woofer as the S35 center that you're already using. If that's too large, or particularly for the surrounds, if you want something even smaller, there's the S10 Satellite, which is the same tweeter, but just a smaller woofer in there. And I believe there is an S25 larger bookshelf speaker if you just want higher output, but that one ends up being larger than the Polk bookshelf speaker that you're already using. The S15 is almost the exact same dimensions as the T15 that you're currently using. So if the T15 has been fine, there's no reason why the S15 wouldn't be.
I can see why he's so married to the center channel now that I found it and looked at it. Yeah. It's very long and thin.
That's right.
So it's much more akin to a sound bar looking.
Yeah, similar.
So I can understand why he's in love with this thing. It's more of I'm guessing it's more of a form factor thing than he just loves the sound of it. Well, and it has
pretty decent sound. Like for all the speakers that have that type of form factor, it is one of the better ones. I'll absolutely say that. So
it's got a tweeter in the center and three woofers on either side.
Yeah, on either side.
So it's a very long, thin. So I can understand why he likes this. So that's fine. But yes, I agree with Rob. Stick with the same line.
Yeah.
I
see no reason not to. The price isn't a problem either. It's less expensive.
I know, they're not
Martin
expensive.
Logans. So, that's absolutely what I would do. No question about it. I will mention the original version 1 Signature Series has been discontinued now. Some of it is still available, but those models are on clearance. The version 2 they have dubbed Signature Elite. There is absolutely no reason you can't use the Signature Elite version 2 with the original Signature version 1. The drivers haven't changed. They've just mildly changed some of the cosmetics.
And I'll be honest with you. Usually, when you say I bought a subwoofer and love it, I'm going to get speakers from the same company. That usually doesn't. That is a questionable decision almost always. It works out in some cases. SVS, we still like their speakers, and HSU as well, but just about everybody else.
Maybe Power Sound Audio, like if that's what you're going for, is massive high output everywhere.
Yeah. Alan wants a new pair of speakers for his office. He has a standing desk, and what he would like to do is mount a pair of speakers quite high up and have them angled down so they will sound good whether he's sitting or standing. He's got a $500 budget, and we'll be replacing a pair of $50 Dayton Audio bookshelf speakers. Well, at least he's gone up by an order of magnitude. He has a Yamaha receiver in his office to power the speakers. It's 20 years old, but for just stereo, it should be fine, right? Yes, it will be fine.
Absolutely, yes.
So what do we suggest? I can see Rob already suggested the thing that immediately popped into my mind.
Just what he described, I'm like, well, this fits. It checks every box.
He wants good sound, and it's important that mounting them is easy and quick as possible. Working from home with kids home from school as well means the fewer hassles, the better. And of course, if we can't all say this together, those of you that have listened to this podcast, you don't know what you're doing with your lives. So let's all say it together.
Okay.
3, 2, 1. Prime elevation speakers.
SVS prime elevation speakers are $500 a pair. They have the built-in angle. It doesn't get much easier to mount on a wall than the prime elevations.
Yeah.
That's what they're meant to do, is mount on a wall.
Comes with the mount, comes with all the hardware.
Comes with the mount, all the hardware.
It's good.
Looks nice, fits, tucks nicely up into the corner between the wall and the ceiling if that's where you want to put it, and has that angle built in exactly like you want. You've got the receiver already on hand to power them. It will be absolutely fine powering prime elevations in this small room in your office. So I can't really think of a good reason to point you elsewhere, other than if you didn't want to spend the maximum budget. You could, of course, consider something else, but I'm like, that's the one that checks all the boxes, particularly easy to mount. Sounds really good. So there you go. Normally for computer speakers, we think of Audio Engine first, but there's no reason to do that in this instance. So
yeah, I don't really see any reason to do that here. They literally took every single box. So
right.
I mean, there's other angled speakers that exist that you could look into. I mean, they're out there, and there's small satellite speakers that would cost less, but then you would need a mount that you could use to angle them, which would be more of a hassle than literally having a speaker that's the right angle. I think this checks all the boxes.
Yep.
Infinite Gary, we mentioned the importance of getting certified HDMI cables. That got Gary thinking, why don't we have certified speaker wire and certified RCA cables? Because nobody's figured out how to make money off of that yet, I guess. I guess there's
who would
no
certify
reason.
It? That's,
you need a board. I mean, and then it's not like it's having to, like, HDMI cables are complicated. All the rest of these cables are kind of not. They're just a copper wire,
particularly speaker wire. That's really not complicated. Speaker wire.
AudioQuest will certify their cables for you. I mean, they'll be happy to do it. They're certified AudioQuest overpriced cables. There you go.
Very overpriced. Let me see. Why don't we have certified speaker wire RCA cables? So I mean, there's the issue of there's no centralized body. If you were to try to create some kind of centralized body, I mean, I'm sure you'd get some companies to sign on and agree together because they do enjoy slapping logos and charging a higher price for something, but there'd be some competing body because, of course, some other group is going to claim that their speaker wire is better, or it exceeds the certification, or the certification wasn't right, or there's just going to be a whole bunch of infighting. So HDMI kind of works because there is the HDMI Forum and the HDMI LLC, the licensing body, and they kind of keep a lid on it. And it is, in a way, necessary. It was like born out of necessity because the original HDMI cables, there was no certification. It wasn't until we got to 18 gigabits per second that cables that were already labeled as high speed, people were discovering had dropouts.
Right.
And they're like, why? Why does that dropouts? Physically it's put together correctly. It meets the specifications for what was high speed. It should work, but it wasn't quite, tight enough tolerances to get to the 18 gigabits per second, so we ended up with premium high speed, the certified high speed, and now, of course, ultra high speed. They just, from the beginning, they're like, we know going from 18 to 48, we're going to be facing the same issues and more, so let's just do it right away.
Well, if you remember at the beginning of HDMI, there was, like Rob said, there was no certification.
There wasn't,
and Clint took like a mass of cables over to Monster Audio, where they allowed him to use their test equipment to test out these things, and there was there was variance all over the place, and because we weren't sending a huge amount of data, people were, depending on what equipment they had, and we weren't pushing the limits of what the cable needed to send for the most part. So they would be able to take a cable and it would work for them, and then somebody else would take a cable and it wouldn't work for them. And there was no guarantee one way or the other what you were going to get. But there wasn't enough of a call because there wasn't so much hardware out there that was literally pushing the upper limits of what the cable could do.
And I think when you're talking about HDMI cables versus speaker wire and RCA interconnects, like with HDMI, because it works or it doesn't, like it's perfect until it's not. And when it's not, it's just not. You either get dropouts or you get sparklies or, blotches or macro blocking or something very obvious. So people want to know ahead of time, is this basically guaranteed to work or not? And it is, in that sense, it's binary. It works for that. With speaker wire and RCA cables, if there were some kind of certification for it, there's still going to be this huge crowd that's going to go, well, I got these certified cables, but they don't sound as good as my cables. Because that's the crowd that's going to worry about whether it's certified or not. And by and large, I would predict that the only thing you would see online is how the certified cables aren't good enough, or that the non-certified cables are better in some way. I think that'll be
just as good or better. Yeah.
That'll be all the discussion. With speaker wire, resistance, I'm tempted to say, is the only metric that matters. I mean, I guess capacitance and inductance play a role, but they're inverses of each other. If the inductance goes up, the capacitance goes down, and vice versa. There's not much you can really do about that. And to make the resistance of a speaker wire lower, you just make it thicker. Like, there's really nothing else to be done. And for an RCA cable, as long as it's shielded and is a properly designed coaxial cable on the inside, the biggest problem with RCA cables is the connector. Because there is an impedance mismatch between the cable itself and all RCA connectors just due to the dimensions. You can't get away from it. But in terms of it having an impact on your analog audio, there's really just no time where that happens. So as long as it isn't physically broken, it's going to work just fine. So certification, there's no central board. It isn't really necessary for those type of cables, and I would definitely predict that if there were certification, there'd be no end of arguing about it because it's not a binary thing like HDMI.
Right. John in the Philippines. This is the Stormtrooper helmet guy.
Yeah.
That I made take all new pictures with Stormtrooper helmets everywhere, and I am very pleased that he did so because it made me happy. John has 2 pairs of B&W in-ceiling speakers for Atmos. They fire straight down. He recently read online that it's better to use angled in-ceiling speakers for Atmos. Wherever you read that, don't go there again.
And this comes up more than once, so yeah.
No. Is that true? And if so, do you just angle them straight forwards and back, or do you tilt them in so they're aimed directly at the main listening position? Should you replace his B&W speakers with RSL in-ceiling speakers that are angled? And the no. The no is the answer.
I just can't come up with any reason why I would replace your in-ceiling speakers other than one of them broke, and I can't get that model anymore. I mean, your B&W in-ceiling speakers are overkill for Atmos. They absolutely do not need to replace them. I would just refer you to Dolby's own white paper on Dolby Atmos for home theater, and I've got a quote right from their white paper that says, we recommend using overhead speakers with a wide dispersion pattern, plus or minus 45 degrees to either side is what they're recommending. If you use overhead speakers with narrow dispersion, you may angle the drivers slightly towards your listening position. So it's the same thing that I talk about with all speakers. I want the listeners to be within the cone of dispersion. So if you have a narrow cone of dispersion because it's a horn-loaded in-ceiling speaker, or it's recessed back so far into a coaxial design that it's acting like a horn, or it's a ribbon tweeter or something like that, that's maybe it's got wide dispersion in one direction but not the other, a multitude of reasons why you might have narrow dispersion. They're saying, keep the listening area within the cone of dispersion, but if you have wide dispersion, you're going to be within the cone of dispersion. That's how you come at it. They're trying to mimic what you would get in a commercial movie theater where the speakers are way up high, a much taller ceiling than you likely have in your home theater. And so there the sound is really quite diffuse. It's not super pinpoint sharp. It's from way up above. That's what you're trying to mimic. Now, I have no beef with the people who say, I want to notice my overhead speakers more than I notice the overhead speakers in a commercial movie theater. Maybe it's not technically correct to the signal, but that's what I want. I want to notice them. I want to hear them. I would recommend just turning the trim levels up a little bit.
Right.
That would be my recommendation.
Make them louder.
Yeah.
Don't point them at you.
Right. I mean, on the other hand, if you do aim your in-ceiling speakers at you, like it's not really gonna hurt much. The chances are everybody's still gonna be within the cone of dispersion, because like unless your seating area is massive, it's probably gonna be just fine.
Right. My problem is that the angled or the aimable speakers are more expensive for the most part, and there's no reason for it. Like you said, if you want to know some more, turn them up.
Yeah.
But that's not what people are saying online. What people are saying online is that
I know.
they should be aimable, and that's where I disagree heavily. So
I mean, it's that classic thing of, I guess, if you unplug everything else and you only listen to them and you're like, oh, can I tell a difference when I just play them one at a time? Like, that's not how we use them. That's not what they're even for. The name Atmos, atmospheric, that's where that comes from, right? It's supposed to be all kind of a little bit fuzzy. You're supposed to be able to tell, it's coming from above me and like generally in front and to the left, generally to the back and to the right, like that's the type of directionality we're going for. We're not going for pinpoint localization. That's not the goal.
I wrote an article about this, but I guess I haven't published it yet because I can't find it. So I have written an article about why you don't need to aim your...
Yeah.
And I really, for me, I'm like you said, if you bought them already, if you had them up there already, I would recommend that you, instead of, if it's one of those tweeters that you can aim, just face it straight down.
Yeah, I really don't like the tweeter is the only part that gets aimed. I don't like that at all.
But if it's, if it's one that you can, it's like at an angle and you can adjust, like you can swivel it a little bit so that it's either pointed directly at your listening position, just have it go kind of straight forward so that you're a little bit off axis to the tweeter.
But absolutely do not buy new speakers to replace your B and W in ceilings. There's no reason whatsoever.
Greg. It's been a while since we discussed Greg's 11x18 theater. Based on previous advice, he switched to its 5.2.4 configuration from his 7.2.4. I wonder who told him to get rid of those back speakers.
Gosh, where might he have heard that?
And added a lot more acoustic panels on his back wall. Both of those changes made big improvements, especially for anybody sitting in the back row of seats. On the riser, the panels are DIY. He had 16-inch on-center mineral wool insulation for standard 2x4 bays, so he just made 16-inch squares, 3.5 inches deep. There isn't any extra room where when the seats recline, so no additional air gap, but the panels in the upper corners are double thickness, and regardless, it sounds much better back there. So we're looking at there's an image
before and after, yeah.
Before and after, you can see that there were panels near the front of the room, but nothing at the back, and now there's panels all over the place.
I mean, he had three small panels just behind the primary seat originally, along with the surround back speakers that were blasting into the back seat's ears. And those surround back speakers are gone. And now basically the entire back wall is covered. And then he's got these extra thick panels that are in the upper corners playing some bass trap roll up there.
Right, I'm going to scroll past all these images. He had the contractor construct the framing for the false wall, 24 inches on center, and he put shelves for the front three speakers within that framing. Then the whole frame is covered in acoustically transparent fabric. The projection screen is not acoustically transparent, and the center speaker is below the bottom edge, and the front, left, and right are on the outside edges. You can remove the screen to access the area behind the false wall, though it's a very tight squeeze. And he basically lined the entire front wall behind the screen with insulation, although there wasn't enough space for insulation directly behind his front, left, and right speakers. Final treatments are his 2 by 3 foot panels, 3.5 inches thick on both side walls. And if he sits in the theater with nothing playing, he's right on the cusp of hearing his own pulse and feeling like maybe his ears need to pop, which means he has a lot of acoustic treatments in there. So he figures he's right on the threshold of having over-treated this room, but after running Odyssey on his X4 4400H, is that what that's supposed to be?
Oh yeah, that should be 4400. Sorry, I missed a zero.
Okay, he's thrilled, and he thinks it's never sound better with Atmos sounding like it's fully immersive, and as though his speakers have disappeared. This is all a preamble, guys.
Yep.
All right, and gals. All right.
So you got an idea about the room. It's heavily treated.
Heavily treated. This is almost exactly the way I like my home theater to be. Yeah. Mine is not quite this treated yet, but I prefer a room that's a little over treated to a room that's under treated.
I do too. That's my preference. Yep.
So first question, should he change any of his panels to be combo panels? And I'm going to say no because that's what I believe, but I don't know if Rob's going to agree with me, but it sounds to me like your room, like I want to go in your room. I want to be in your room. I don't see any reason why I would change anything.
Yeah, I mean, as far as he actually has later on a single waterfall graph that we're going to be talking about regarding measurements and that, but since I've previewed that image for myself, there's no indication in your upper treble range that you've got some weirdness that diffusion would necessary. And as we talked about at length last week, we would not anticipate it because your room is not large and your seats are not far away from any of these walls. So the odds that diffusion alone is going to be like necessary in any way, in your instance, if you're saying you're right, like he's all along he's saying he really loves the sound. So yeah, but if you were saying, well, I'm right on the cusp of it kind of sounding maybe overly dead, I would just maybe remove some of the panels on your front and back wall. That's where I would start, because I mean now we're just talking about sheer surface area that's been covered, and if you want to get a little bit more reverberation back into the room, it's simply a matter of having a little bit more of a percentage of hard flat surfaces versus absorptive surfaces. So given that you've got this, plethora of panels, square panels on your back wall, I'd maybe take down a couple of those if you were saying, yeah, this room is just starting to sound overly dead. That's probably going to be easier than removing the insulation that's behind your false wall.
It's also got a drop ceiling too, so those are probably acoustic panels up there as well.
Exactly, So, that's the way I would come at it. I see no reason to spend more money to add combo panels to this, because like we talked about last week, combo panels, diffusers, they still reduce the decay times. They still reduce the energy of the high frequencies versus hard flat surfaces. If you're saying, I don't have enough high frequency anymore, I don't have enough hard flat surfaces, then you don't want the thing that still reduces those. You just want to go back to a greater percentage of hard flat surfaces. But in your case, I don't think you need to do anything.
So the last time we wrote in, we suggested swapping the positions of his movie posters and the panels that are directly to either side of his front row of seats, but he likes the way things are now. So is there anything else that ought to be moved? Should he swap some of the smaller square panels on the back wall with the 2x3 panels on the side wall? Should any of the speakers be moved? I mean, I don't see any problem with anything here. I don't see any reason to... Like, we suggested that because... you didn't have a ton of absorption, but now you've got absorption everywhere.
Well, and it was also just that where the movie poster is still a reflection point, and then the panel that's behind the movie poster isn't really a reflection point for anything. So I was kind of like, it's still fine to have that because that's just your general, I'm covering more surface area. I'm reducing the reverberation time of the room as a whole, but it's not really treating a specific reflection. He surmised in his email, he's like, well, maybe it's treating a first reflection from one of the surround speakers, but I'm like, no, that's not really the goal. We want the speakers that are imaging from the front of the room. Those are the reflections we're worried about. So that was the only reason for saying to swap it. But honestly, if you're like, my room is already at the point where I'm like, it's verging on maybe being overtreated, maybe you take those panels down and that gets you to where you want to be, because that'll just add to the reverberation of the room in general a little bit by not having those additional panels on the sidewall. So I see no reason to swap the larger panels with the panels on the back wall. That visually, I don't think that would even make sense, to be honest. And performance-wise, there's no difference, so there's no reason to do that. I think you're in good shape.
So he said, should he upgrade his front 3 speakers? He might be able to afford it sometime this year. Rob trashed. That sounds like Rob. He's so mean. He's mean to people. He made Sean cry.
Yep.
With Polk RTI, trashed his Polk RTI speakers a few episodes ago, and since he has very little room behind his false wall, would sealed or front ported speakers be better? He's considering the Aperion Novus, the NHTC series, or maybe the monoprice monolith THX speakers. What do we think? Well, I think if anybody's going to hear a difference between different speakers, it's going to be you.
We can say your room has been treated.
I would say that if you were thinking to yourself, that I want to upgrade my speakers, but I'm afraid I might not notice that there's a difference between them, I would not be afraid of that. Yeah, so should you upgrade your speakers? I think you certainly could, and I think you would experience a difference, and I think it would be one that you would find to be beneficial, because you've already done all the work of making the room as good as you're going to make it, and it's almost like you said, too good, I guess. would be.
And I mean, the thing is, given that behind your false wall, that's pretty much all insulation back there.
Yeah.
I'm not
worried about ports.
We're not worried about ports. If you have a rear port, it's going to be firing into some insulation, basically. He's like, actually, directly behind the speaker, right where the port would be. That's just because of the depth, the shallow depth there isn't there. But I'm like, but the whole rest of the wall is still covered. That's like digging a hole in your insulation. Basically, you're still going to get, all of that sound dissipated and trapped in there. So I really don't think you need to limit yourself to only sealed or front ported designs. You can go with pretty much any design that you want to. Now, if you went with NHTC series, do I think you'd be disappointed? No, absolutely not. Those are tremendously neutral, very good sounding speakers that will work fabulously well in your false wall setup. They are a sealed design, so there's really no concerns about any of it. AVRant Novus, I feel largely the same. But if you went, SVS Ultra series, if you went Ascend Acoustics SE series, or went to the Sierra series, those are rear ported. But like I say, I'm not concerned about having the rear port. So essentially, we're back to our old advice, which is that you've got to audition, because you do have the room where you very well might hear differences. It might end up being that Revel is what you like best. Kef is what you like best. Try as much as you're able to. I mean, I mentioned those because those are often available in local stores, particularly Kef. SVS, take advantage of their free two-way shipping. AVRant, take advantage of the free two-way shipping. Bring in one pair of Ascend speakers just to give them a try. You'll be out the shipping cost, but give them a try. I think you owe it to yourself. You've invested a lot of, if not all the money, you've invested a lot of time, you've invested a lot of effort into getting
elbow grease.
Getting the acoustics of your theater really, really good. So you owe it to yourself to spend the time to audition, because we can't tell you get this pair of speakers. We can tell you that if you get a certain pair of speakers, it's going to be accurate to the signal. That doesn't mean they're going to be your favorite, and you absolutely deserve to get your favorite speakers at this point. So zero problem with any of the ones that you mentioned, including the monolith speakers from THX. I'd have no problem with those either. They're very, very neutral by all the measurements. So, but I can't tell you these are the ones to get. Audition.
Yeah, it's looking like you want to spend money, and we can help you do that. But, I think Rob's right. Auditioning, especially in this type of room, is imperative.
And I think you'll have some fun with it. I think you'll find it enlightening, and I think you will find it worthwhile. Because if you're the person who is willing to build all these panels and compare the sound of the panels on versus the panels off, I have to believe you're willing to audition speakers and enjoy the process as you do so and feel more confident by the end of it.
His two subs are an HSU STF2 and an SVS PB10 NSD. They're at the midpoints of his sidewalls. Any issues running these two different models together? Would two identical subs be worth it? So the problem I see here is the STF2, I think, only goes down to about 25 hertz.
Yeah. I mean, it was rated at minus 3 decibels, 25 hertz. That was the rating for the STF2. Yeah.
And the NSD, the PB10 should, I don't know. I should go lower, right?
It tickled 20 hertz, because that's going back a couple of generations, but it tickled 20 hertz. It got a little bit lower than the STF2.
Yeah, so I that would be my concern. As far as mixing and matching HSU and SVS, I got usually no problems with that. Yeah. I would be worried about the basically the STF rolling off before the SVS.
In this instance, it's a pretty minor concern, because the STF2 was no slouch, but by the specs and by the measurements, it did start rolling off prior to 20 hertz. So I mean, it's by no means end of the world. Like, for example, if you continue using this until you have enough money, I'm not worried about it. It's not like you're suffering with your combination of an STF2 and a PB10 NSD. Is there a small improvement to be had? Yeah, there's a small improvement to be had, but it's not free. It's 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 going to cost you some money, especially now that the prices of everything went up,
right?
Which I'm not super happy about.
So let's just say that the specs are dead on, and that it's a brick wall filter at 25 for the HSU, and the SVS gets down to 21 and then just stops, which is of course not the way this thing's work.
No.
But let's pretend that that's the case. So you've got 4 or 5 hertz where the SVS is playing and the HSU is not, would be the concern. And then, so when that happens, during those 4 or 5 hertz at the very, very lowest part of the signal, you could be sitting in a place that is either a boost or a null. That's what could happen. So you could smooth out those 4 or 5 hertz at the very, very lowest end for the couple of seconds every movie or two that they actually play. So is there, like what Rob said, is there improvement to be had? Yes. Will you notice it? I don't know if you would. I mean, if you like often used one specific, scene or track to demo your subs for people or whatever, and you had listened to it a whole bunch, you may say, "Oh, this sounds a little bit, like it's a little bit quieter, a little bit louder than it used to be."
Sure.
At at this one little point, you may notice it, but we're not talking like the difference you'll notice when you get different speakers. It's going to be very, very, very hard to pinpoint, and you may never, ever notice it.
But if this is a future in mind, I'm saving up towards it. Is there anything to begin with? Like, this wouldn't be the top of my priority list. I think you're already pretty good. And in your case, I would definitely be looking at the Monoprice Monolith 10-inch, just because, everybody else's prices, including SVS. Like, what is that? The PB 1000 now, that's up to like $700, isn't it, or more?
I don't know.
It's gotten pretty pricey. I'm not super happy about that. The Monolith 10 is like $650 or something. It's not cheap either, but to get the performance that you're talking about, to get something that's even better than what you already have, that would be the place to look. Would be the Monolith 10-inch.
Yeah, the PB is $800.
Jeez.
PB 1000 Pro is like
they've got to bring in a new series below the 1000 series, because they've kept upping the performance over at SVS. They kept upping the performance of the 1000 series, and I'm like, go back a couple generations. It was already pretty good performance. Get that price point back down.
I will tell you that Monolith is like 72 pounds, though. But you already know where to put it. So once you get it into the room, you'll just plop it right down where it was, where the HSU was. And I don't think you have any problem selling that HSU.
There's nothing better at a lower price than that Monolith 10-inch. That's pretty honking sub.
So he put a U-Mic 1 on the tripod and wedged the tripod between his 2 front seats so that's directly in the center. He left Odyssey engaged and measured his front 3 speakers as well as the subwoofer output with his dual subs running together in mono. So all we have is a single measurement position here, but do these measurements indicate any further improvements that can be made to the room or his integration of his dual subs? So let's take a look.
So, I mean, unfortunately, we can't tell a lot about the bass because we're only seeing one measurement position. We're seeing 3 different speakers, but of course the bass performance is going to be the same from speaker to speaker because the bass is being handled by those dual subwoofers in all instances. So when we're seeing these overlapping lines in its frequency response, those aren't 3 different seats. That's 3 different speakers.
Different speakers, right.
So we can't tell a ton about the bass response, although the bass response looks very nice for that one seat. Really seeing no issues there. The center speaker, that's the most squiggly looking one. That's the sort of yellow amber color in this one. And that's the one that's got sort of the biggest dip. It looks right around 300 hertz. And then it's got some, peaks before and after that too. I am fairly confident in saying I would expect that is probably a floor bounce or a ceiling bounce. That's the most likely thing in my, like, given the way that this room is treated and then given what we know about the positioning of your speakers, to me, the most likely reason why you're seeing that sort of rise and dip only in the center speaker right at that between 200, 300 hertz range would be a floor bounce or a ceiling bounce. Do you want to add even more treatment to this room? Perhaps at the first reflection point of the floor and or ceiling? But I mean, Like that's sort of
bed.
the one.
Throw a doggy bed on a big thick doggy bed on the floor right in front of your center speaker.
Like that's the one and only thing that I'm seeing here. If we switch over on YouTube or if you're following along on Flickr to the waterfall graph, like wow, that's some even decay times. I see nothing. Again, maybe the only little bit of a squiggle is right around 300 hertz at that same place where we're getting some kind of reflection in the room. And like I said, I'm fairly confident that's a floor or ceiling bounce. It's really what makes the most sense. It's right in the frequency range where we would expect a floor or ceiling bounce to be. So there wouldn't be anything particularly surprising about that. The decay time, like, yeah, do you need diffusion? No, look at the decay times going across your treble there. There's nothing. There's no squiggles in the decay times.
Looks good. Both LFE channel, both subs on, measure center of front row, no smoothing. Oh, this is just a subwoofer response.
Yeah, just the subwoofers by themselves. And again, look, is it a perfectly flat line? No, it's also within plus minus 2.5. Okay, there's no problem here.
I am sorry for that noise. That is my phone ringing. It never rings, and I always forget to mute it. Okay. And then my door's open because I get hot in here, and now we have to listen to that. I apologize.
It'll stop. It's a ring.
It'll stop. I apologize. I would get up, but we're going to go on.
It's not that loud.
It is to me. It's bothering me. All right, that stopped. Let's see if they call back. I'm going to lose my mind.
Okay.
David says, we are clearly fans of cylinder subs. That is true. We both own them.
Yep.
We've also mentioned DIY cylinder subs, which people often make out of sonotubes.
Yep.
I have not seen somebody do that in a very long time, but you are correct. That used to be the prevailing logic. David works with sonotubes all the time, and he wants to know how crazy a couple of these ideas are. The typical cylinder subs are 16 or 18 inches in diameter and then quite tall, but he works with much larger diameter sonotubes. So could you make a cylinder sub that has a wide diameter and then is only 18 or 20 inches tall? He's thinking that might make for a nice coffee table in front of a couch. Any thoughts? I mean, other than the fact that that's not where I want to put a sub.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so it's all about, there's two things, there's a lot of things, but there's a couple of things that are going on inside your cylinder sub when you make them. First of all, you need volume, air volume, and second, you have ports. I've almost never seen a cylinder sub that doesn't have a port.
And I mean, it's sort of one of the advantages and the reason why they're typically not huge in diameter, but quite tall, because then you can have a nice long port, and a long port will be tuned to a very low frequency. So you're sort of using geometry to your advantage, right? You don't have to have a bent port inside of a more cube-shaped container cabinet. You can just have a long tube port that fits this tall length. If you got rid of the height of the cylinder and just had a much bigger diameter, honestly, I would probably just seal it at that point. I just go ahead and make it a sealed sub, because then the internal volume, like, even if it was a little bit confusing in his email, because he sometimes used the word like how many inches around. So that to me makes me think the perimeter of the sonotube.
Right.
And some of the ones he mentioned would have been like an 18-inch diameter, like fairly standard. And I'm like, if you had an 18-inch diameter and then it's 18 inches tall, that's pretty compact. But there's no reason that couldn't be a sealed sub. I mean, there's lots of sealed subs that are very compact. They're barely big enough to house the driver and amplifier, and that's it. That's it for internal volume. So with this type of design where you're not going to have the advantage of the height, the geometric advantage of the height of the cylinder, it's going to be a short cylinder, I would just make it a sealed sub. There's no reason why it can't work.
Right. And I guess that's what it comes down to. So when you're, the internal volume, that's, that and the port are the two things that the cylinder subs do well, because you can get a lot more volume and a lot, and fit your port much more, or ports, much more easily than you can with a box sub.
Yeah.
You just get a lot more out of it. So he says, if you had a coffee table sub and it was smack dab in the middle of the room, what would that be like in terms of subwoofer placement, and how would the room respond?
You would be activating every room mode. It's perhaps the worst place to do it.
This is why I started off saying that's not where I'd want to put a sub to begin with. I mean, so where do you, if you were going to do this, like, we know that two subs mirrored help even out the room response, right? Where's the mirrored sub going in your
The ceiling.
I mean, I guess. I guess if it's not dead center in the middle of the room, you would put one coffee table in front of your couch and the other coffee table behind your couch, sort of thing. So I don't. It would activate, like you said. It's literally the worst place.
Now, if your room is completely irregularly shaped, though, if it's not a rectangle,
it's not rectangle, right?
It's not gonna make too much difference.
all bets are off.
Yeah,
but that's always the case, though, isn't it? That's what we say. Right. If you have an irregularly shaped room, it's gonna your placement is gonna be much different than anything we could possibly recommend, because we don't have the models available or any sort of program available that can model the bass perfectly for your space.
Easy rule of thumb, super easy to do.
Yeah.
You can do a full fluid dynamics analysis with a computer powerful enough, but that's not quite where we're at just yet.
You have to model everything that's in the room and all the surfaces and everything else.
If this is the only sub in your room, I mean, you're certainly not benefiting from multiple subwoofers and what those can do in terms of uniformity. So yeah, I'm not that wouldn't be my goal. My goal wouldn't be a round subwoofer smack dab in the middle of my room. That would not be my goal.
I mean, it's an interesting idea.
It is.
And I bet if you made them, people would buy them.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking this could be a business model, there is no doubt in my mind that you could sell these things, especially to people who are in great rooms and in weird spaces, and they want to have a subwoofer, but they can't sell the idea to their wife. They're like, you're like, here.
And you could make it an ottoman too. That would be an option.
Yeah. So he also works with tubes that with a right angle built in. Could that be turned into? You can turn anything into a subwoofer if you put a driver in it and cap it off in the amp. Would you? I mean, you could. Yes.
Yup.
I mean, you could. Would I? I would not. But that's also because I don't want to. What essentially looks like a large periscope.
Right.
I have a hard enough time selling subwoofers to people that are just look like water heaters.
I guess he's thinking for the people who just can't stand the idea that the driver is firing down. This is a way that you could have the driver firing forward and then still have this smokestack going up. The problem is once you have the right angle in there, you calculating what the port would need to be, the dimensions and the angles of the port, that becomes much more complicated. I'm assuming the sono tubes are designed to be waterproof so that where the bend is wouldn't be a place where air could leak out. But I'm not 100% on that, but I would assume that that's the case, that it's reinforced. But again,
it's obviously a weak point though, right? I mean, it's got to be a weak point.
I would probably end up erring on the side of making it sealed, at which point, what's the point of having this tall right angle thing? I don't know. I don't know how to do the math to calculate what the port would need to be.
So guys, if you're not looking at the pictures, this tube literally looks like a periscope, but very, very big. And if you put the driver on the front there, I mean, you're putting a lot. I mean, think of the size of some of these drivers. These drivers can be 20, 30, 40 pounds sometime. And now it's at the front.
Well, and I was thinking that this would be upside down so that it's, an actual L shape. And I think, the tall leg would end up just looking like a smokestack. I think he's thinking, this would be a way to make a cylinder sub with a front firing driver. But like I say, calculating what the port would need to be, I don't know how to do that math. So for a DIY, would err on the side of making it sealed, and then I don't see what the point of the form factor would be.
Again, it would be unique.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you could put some marketing gibberish in there that would convince people that your design is best because of angles or something. I don't know. So yes, lastly, for any of these unusual sub ideas, should they be ported or sealed? And Rob has been commenting on that the entire time.
Yeah.
I think that I think, like I said, there's math.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of predicting what your performance is going to be, sealed is just so much easier. And you're not going to have you're going to be able to fit a big old honking 18-inch driver, or perhaps even more, or at least a 15-inch driver into any of these. You can attach whatever amplifier you want to it. So I mean, you can get to the extension and output by brute force. We're just going to move this driver until it makes the sound I want it to make, and you can do that. So I would go sealed 100% for DIY, because unless you're an engineer advanced enough to know the math of how to work out what the ports need to be, I'm going to go sealed.
Right. I don't even know that there would be a pro. I mean, anyways, yes, seal. Aras. So we talked Aras out of buying a townhouse. We did. Sounds like something I would do. And he will stick to looking for a detached house. He's very grateful for our advice, and he really does want to get back to being able to play things loud and without worrying about attached neighbors. I did write an article about this.
Yeah.
With the budget he has, it won't be a big house, and that means whatever room he has in the basement for a home theater is sure to be relatively close to the furnace room. He will hopefully be able to do some basic soundproofing for the theater, but it won't be an entire room within a room. So what can he do to prevent sound from traveling all throughout the house via the HVAC ducts, and anything else he can do to cut down on noise from the furnace and the washer and dryer? So this is a soundproofing company question that can that you can do. But I mean, we've talked about some of these things quite often. The number one thing that you can do to keep noise from going through your HVAC system is to use the flexible stuff.
Yeah, at the very least, and something I would highly recommend doing anyway is for the main trunk, not necessarily the very first thing, but the main branches that come off of the main trunk. They absolutely have. It's just a canvas connector, right? So instead of it being a solid metal throughout, every trunk being solid hard metal that will reverberate and carry the sound very easily, they have these canvas sections. They're actually in there to make it easier when there's like expansion or contraction, or you just want to like bridge a little gap in your like you've made a change and you want to bridge a gap in your HVAC duct. That was sort of the original reason they existed, but they do a good job of just severing that physical vibration tie of all the metal going throughout the entire house being connected and vibrating together. And that is something that any HVAC professional can install for you. They're very, very common. They aren't super expensive. And they just slot right in to your existing trunk and line setup. So there's absolutely no reason not to have those main branches replaced right away with the canvas spanners. That is one way to help as far as it going throughout the entire house. And then for the small branches that are specifically feeding your theater, you can make those into the flexible ducting instead of the hard ducting. Put a couple of bends in them. Don't go overboard because that'll start restricting your airflow. But have a couple of bends put in there with flexible ducting instead. And again, you're just reducing the physical vibrations that would go through. So that's the easiest way to do that at a not large expense. And then the main thing I would do for cutting down for your furnace and your washer and dryer is try to dampen decouple them. Try to have the furnace and the washer, because they have those industrial thing like pads.
I've linked to those at AV Gadgets before. They are meant to go underneath washer and dryers. That's right, yeah. That are at your like the big ones,
industrial
at
the
industrial washer dryer places, like your laundry mats and stuff that are meant to, because if not, those places they already
are pretty unlivable, but they'd be utterly so. So yeah, I start at the source, right? Those are the things that are physically vibrating and making noise. Decouple them, get them damped off the floor. And like I say, those industrial pads exist for that very purpose. So again, that is something that can be done. Though the pads are not expensive, thankfully. You can get them at the hardware store, and they're not expensive at all. They're in fact a nice, affordable way to decouple your subwoofers sometimes in place.
They're just not pretty.
Yeah, they're just not pretty.
It's not very pretty.
We're not worried about it for your furnace, right? It's fine. It's going to be hidden under there. So yeah, I would absolutely do that first. Then, I mean, we're back to just your basic soundproofing. If you can, if it's an unfinished basement, so much the better, because then you can install staggered studs. And so instead of having the drywall attached to the very same studs on both sides, you're going to have staggered studs. That doesn't eat up a ton of floor space. That's the way to save the most floor space and not make the construction super complicated. If you have the budget to do, 2 layers of drywall with green glue, that's going to be your standard thing to do there. Being the basement, you're going to want to have the dimpled plastic over the foundation floor anyway. That's just for drainage purposes, just for moisture purposes. And that's good. Once you have that, then you secure your, tongue and groove over the dimpled plastic, and then put a layer of rubber over that. and then whatever finished floor goes on there. So you can do the basics of soundproofing without it being a true room within a room. And if everything else is decoupled, including your HVAC ducts, if they're all decoupled by those canvas spanners and the flexible ducting coming into your theater, it's not that your house is going to be silent. You know, you turn your theater up to full reference volume, your home is not going to be silent. It would still bother attached neighbors, but it's definitely going to be well muffled, right? It's going to be much more livable in the rest of the house.
Okay, sorry, I got on Amazon to link up the
industrial pads.
The industrial pads. They're like $22 for 4 of them.
Yeah,
I mean,
there you go.
Like, they cost nothing. You know?
The biggest hassle is going to be lifting the furnace to put them onto the pads.
Right?
That's by far the worst part of it.
Yeah, I might put that into the selling with the selling documents. Like, we would like these things to be decoupled before we move in. Preston uses a Sony HW40ES projector on the 106-inch screen. It's full HD 1080p projector, so it does not accept 4K or HDR of any kind. He uses a Panasonic UB420 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. Regular Blu-rays still look great, and Ultra HD Blu-rays often look even better, with the Panasonic player converting HDR to SDR and down converting to 1080p output. But when he uses his Roku Premiere Plus to stream content, it detects that his projector is 1080p only, so he only gets regular SDR 1080p stream, not the 4K version. Doing a speed test on his Roku indicates that he has a steady connection speed of 35 megabits per second, or more. So for HD streams, his internet connection and the bandwidth his Roku is receiving should be a problem, right?
Should be fine. In fact, for regular HD, they say all you need is 5 to 8. So yes, should not be a problem as far as that goes.
So all of that is mentioned because he often sees macro blocking, particularly in dark scenes, and a lot of his favorite streaming content has a lot of dark scenes. He's been putting up with it, but it bothers him. So do the 4K streams look substantially better? What if it's 4K SDR as opposed to 4K HDR? He's assuming the 4K streams get a higher bit rate than the HD streams. So does the higher bit rate mean the macro blocking would be gone? The HD streams would look better. Is there a device that could go between his Roku and his projector to trick the Roku into outputting the 4K stream? I already know the answer to this question, even though I can see it here, but I knew the answer to this question anyways. And then down convert to 1080p for his projector. Okay, so yes, there are devices that you can put. They are not cheap. They're
not insanely expensive, but they are not cheap. Yeah,
they're not cheap. They're certainly a lot cheaper than buying a new projector, which would be the solution to your problem, I guess, if you really wanted to. The question that I don't necessarily have the answer to, or definitively have the answer to, is if you will never see macro blocking again. I would guess that some of that macro blocking is not because of the quality, not because of the HD versus 4K streams. Some of it is compression related. Some of it is going to be maybe even encoding related. You know, how they how they encoded this into, or what the original content was into wherever they, whatever stream that you're getting it from. It may be part of the content. There have been episodes that of shows that I have seen where the lip sync is off.
Sure.
It's not my projector, it's not my receiver, it's not anything else. It was encoded wrong, and it will be wrong forever until somebody redoes it. So if you do the stuff that you can do to get 4K, to make your Roku think that it's connected to a 4K device, will you realize never seeing macro blocking again in the dark scenes? I think the answer to that question is probably no. But will it help? The answer is probably yes.
Yeah, so. I mean, all my displays are 4K and HDR. I'm watching the 4K streams. There are certainly times where macro blocking still exists. There's also the fact that if a lot of what you're watching are TV shows, not all of them are even available in 4K. It's going to be the 1080p stream whether you're subscribed to 4K and have a 4K device or not, because that's just what the content is. And there isn't really a difference that's going to be happening there. The bit rate on 4K has to be higher because there are more pixels to send. So there has to be a higher bit rate there. However, there does seem to be a larger gap between the bit rate that they're sending for the HD streams and the bit rate that they're sending for the 4K streams. There's a larger gap in that bit rate than just the pixel count. There does seem to be an improved quality in the 4K version when a 4K version is available. But it's not that you're never going to see macro blocking again. On some of the 4K content that I'm watching, and it is 4K, and it's coming in at a high bit rate, and I don't have, constriction in my internet bandwidth either, there's still some macro blocking there because the video has been compressed. It's not like the same amount of bandwidth as a disc is offering you or a Kaleidoscape is offering. It has been data compressed, and occasionally that macro blocking is going to be there. So you're never going to be 100% free of it. Some of your shows might look a little bit better getting the 4K stream. You're at the very least going to be getting the best available compression codec that the service is using on the 4K stream versus the HD stream. But it's not going to be a blanket that covers all. So if you want to experiment with it, the device that you asked about would be from HD Fury, something that could trick the Roku into sending out 4K, and then that HD Fury device is going to convert that 4K signal down to 1080p SDR. For your projector to be able to view it. So I actually asked HD Fury directly because I was trying to solve this problem for Tom because Tom wants to get the 4K streams so he can get the Atmos audio, which is locked to the 4K stream. You weren't super worried about the video side of it, but it just goes hand in hand. So they actually responded. They said, here are all the following HD Fury devices that are capable of doing this. It starts with the Linker, which is the least expensive, and that's $180. The Arcana is a newer unit. That's $250.
Not on Amazon. It's not.
Directly from
on Amazon. It's $300 on Amazon. That's the cheapest I can
there's
find
shipping
it.
added to that if you order directly from HD Fury. So that's where the Amazon price ends up coming into it. Linker, Arcana, Integral 2 is $270 on the HD Fury website. Vertex, the first one, that's $320. Vertex 2, that's $450. The Diva, which is $500, or the new 8K Vroom, which is $550. So those are all the devices that are capable of doing this. However, they cautioned that in the cases of the Linker, the Integral 2, and the Vertex 1, they require Windows software to program them to be able to do this. Whereas the Arcana and the Vertex 2 and the Diva and the 8K Vroom can do it all with the existing onboard controls. So it's just easier to set them up to do this. That means the Arcana is the easiest at the $250 price point to do what you want to do. The Linker is cheaper, but it's more complicated to set it up. The Linker also only has a single HDMI output, so if you wanted to separate the audio and video, which is kind of more along the lines of what Tom might want to do, then it's not really the best solution. The Arcana would be the better solution. But yeah, $250 from HD Fury and then shipping on top of that, or $300 from Amazon, like Tom found out there. So that's there. And like I say, it's not going to solve all the macro blocking, but it might improve some of it.
Rohan in India. Believe it or not, it was 8 years ago when Rohan wrote us about his house that is entirely concrete, glass, and marble.
Yeah.
Dude, I remember you.
He remembers it. That's right.
I don't remember a lot of people and a lot of their questions, but the guy with the marble house,
That's right.
I remember that.
Yeah.
That sticks. So we stressed how important it was for him to get something, anything, absorbed of it into his room. Otherwise, there was no point worrying about speaker upgrades. Long story short, it took him 8 years to convince his wife that sound absorption in their living room theater would be worth it. She's now on board with adding some GIK art panels. They just have to look good.
Yes.
GIK products can now be purchased directly in India, so being able to purchase them locally is a big help.
Yeah.
They are still easing into this, so the plan is to start with 2 panels, 2 foot by 3 foot each. His main couch is only a foot off the back wall, so we said way back when that treating the back wall directly behind their heads would be crucial and would make the most noticeable improvement. Is that still the best place to start? In your room, I am going to say yes.
Yeah.
Most people would tell you to do the first reflection points of your speakers. Sure. I do not agree in this room. And the reason is there's no world in which I believe that you are not experiencing some sort of slap echo going on behind you.
Yeah.
So
for dialogue intelligibility, like My thinking was also along the lines of you want to notice the difference and you want your wife to notice the difference and maybe agree to even more treatments because the difference was noticeable. You're not going to notice treatments more than dialogue. That is the first place you're going to notice treatments, in a very reflective room like what you have. Dialogue is the thing that's going to stand out the most. When you say, you know what, it's easier to tell what people are saying, that is a very convincing thing.
Yeah.
And when you have your seat only a foot off the back wall, I have zero questions that you have dialogue intelligibility issues, and this will be the most obvious difference if you put those panels right behind your heads.
Right, but therein lies the problem, right? Because these are going to be art panels, which are probably going to want to be displayed a little bit more.
But it's very common to have some kind of artwork behind your couch, on the wall behind your couch. That's very common.
We would prefer if you put them directly behind your head, which is not where you're going to put them.
Yeah, because if they're
you're
high up...
You're going to put them higher.
Yeah, if they're above your head, you're not going to get the benefit. They do need to be at ear level. That's where the panel... Yeah,
so
you're right.
I want to say that what we're saying is true, but you need to understand that we are saying put the panels behind your head at ear level.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's just part of the panel is back there behind your head, it doesn't have to be like you have to center the panel right behind your head.
No.
We're saying is that part of it, like the lower part, has to be lower than ear level so that you're absorbing the sound directly behind your head when you're seated. So I'm going to maybe suggest, because I know where this is going because I can see the rest of the question. I'm going to suggest that maybe you go with a larger panel that has like a dead space below it, if that makes sense, where it's like
it looks like
black,
a thick frame.
Right.
Yeah.
And then have that whatever that extra space is that goes below the image can be lower than the picture part of it, if that makes sense. Which would mean buying a bigger panel than 2 foot by 3 foot. Maybe it's 2 foot by 4 foot.
The image doesn't have to be bigger because you're just going to put blank space around the image to give it maybe
something
that
matches the wall color. Maybe something that looks like a frame. Maybe like, I mean, I don't know. You have to come up with something, but in order to realize these benefits, they have to be behind your head. Okay, so let's just make sure that's clear, because I don't want you thinking you can slap them on the back wall anywhere and it's going to give you the benefit.
Right.
The benefit just by the fact that it is absorption and it is on the wall that we told you to put it on. It has to be behind your ears. Okay?
Yeah, to get the really noticeable difference.
Yeah. So they looked through stock photos together, and his wife picked out 2 images that she likes. The watermark previews have been provided so that we can get an idea. One of them's of a bridge in the evening. It looks like that sunset with lights, and it's all orangey and dark and
bluish, purplish hues in the sky and along the bridge.
And the other one's what, the Louvre? Is that what that is?
I think so. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
So the other one is with the pyramid. You know, if you've ever seen the first
outside of the Louvre, the entrance.
Yeah, the entrance. Yeah, so it's got that glass pyramid that was prominently part of the
Da Vinci Code.
Da Vinci Code movie, right? So. He can see the specs for the images, their physical size and pixel per inch. If you were to purchase the licenses to print them, GIC states that on their website that they recommend 300 dots per inch for the best quality prints, although they will accept as low as 72. If he enlarges the stock photos to fit the 2 by 3 foot panel size, the first image will end up being about 200, and the second one will be 150. So would they look bad? Would they look pixelated? Is there anything that could be done to improve the quality of the final print? So I don't know what your I don't know if India has any other so I use stock images all the time for part of AV Gadgets. So there's a website I'm gonna have to type in because it's called Pixel Bay. Okay. Pixabay, is that what it is? Pixabay. I'm just we'll put it in the show notes. Okay. So Pixabay is a website where basically everything's free. It is the whole design is that, you know, everything up there you can use for anything. I think you can use commercial purposes or whatever. And some of these images you're going to recognize because many of the websites that you go to use these images. They're very common. So and they come in multiple sizes, sometimes very, very large sizes. So I would suggest before you pay for something that you try to find something that's free and use that. Because I guarantee you that you'll find something that looks like these images. They won't be these images because these are images that somebody's getting money for.
That's right.
But they will be similar images up there that you might be able to get for less money. As far as the 300 dots per inch, whatever, I wouldn't worry about, especially at 200 or 150. I don't know that I would worry about it being pixelated. I'd worry about it being washed out more than or anything.
Just kind of fuzzy, kind of blurry.
Yeah. I don't know that I would be worried about it being pixelated as much as I would worry about the just the overall image quality itself being a little bit not as great.
Well, I mean, it is in this instance, it is very much akin to just printing an image on paper at lower resolution versus higher resolution. It's not that it suddenly turns into blocks, macro blocks.
Right.
It's that, just it doesn't look as sharp. It doesn't look as pin sharp. You could, if these are the only images that your wife agrees to, I don't have a problem with that. You could use online AI sharpening. And that will do a better job than just like the basic scaling that your Windows computer will do in the edit tool. You can use some AI sharpening. That'll help. Because that just increases the output file ends up being a higher resolution, and then you're relying on some machine learning to do some scaling and upscaling. But they're pretty good at that these days. Computers are pretty good at sharpening things up. So I wouldn't have a problem with using that, a little bit of AI sharpening, if these are the only images. In addition to what Tom mentioned, looking at other stock photo places, GIK themselves has a huge library of stock photos. So that is another, you could just look through there, and if they have something, then those are ones that they know will work with their printing process. So that is another option.
So he says, having never seen a printed panel in person, he doesn't want to gamble on ordering these panels if they're likely to be disappointed at all. I think that's a very important part of that sentence, the at all bit. They love how these two images look on their computer monitor, but how are the printed panels going to compare to that? He assumes they will look duller and more muted. So can we say whether we think these two images in particular will look good once they're printed? I think that we have no ability to know how your computer monitor is calibrated.
Yeah, that's a big issue. Yep.
So without us knowing what it looks like on your computer monitor, you don't even know if what you're looking at is an accurate representation of what the original image, what the file is. Yeah. Because you don't know whether or not your computer monitor is displaying those colors accurately. Yeah. So will it look like what you're seeing on your computer monitor? Almost certainly no.
Yeah, probably not. I would err on the side of guessing it will not look exactly like it looks on your computer monitor. I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah. So if you don't want to be disappointed at all, I think that this is you're setting yourself up for failure here, because there is no world in which I think you press play on this order, it comes and it looks exactly like what you expected it to look like.
Yeah, if you're judging by what it looks like on your computer monitor, you're not going to put those side by side and go, yeah, those are the same thing, but just bigger.
So there will be differences. I ordered from GIK, and I ordered images based on, I gave them images that I saw on my computer monitor, and when they came, they were duller and more muted. That is true. Okay. But every person who's ever, and there hasn't been a lot because of, the plague, but every person who has come in this room has looked at those panels and go, man, those things are amazing. They look, oh my God, I can't believe those have been printed. Yeah. Those are just printed fabric? Are you kidding me? That looks like a painting. That looks like an actual painting. So will you looking side by side of your monitor, I think you're going to be disappointed, because it is not going to look the same. But I think that you are the only one who's going to think that, because once everybody else sees it, they're going to go, "Oh my God, I can't believe those are just printed on fabric." I think that's what they're gonna experience. So I think you need to reel in your expectations a little bit and realize that there is no way. I mean, in order for people who do this professionally, they have professionally calibrated, extremely accurate monitors in order to do that.
And then the exact colors of the prints don't always line up exactly with a very accurate color accurate monitor, because there is a difference between, you know, the physical print versus the monitor color, but it's closer. If your screen is calibrated to the same color standard that they're using for because the color standard they're using for the print is not video color standard. So you can't do like a video calibration on your screen and end up with the same colors. You have to use the same CMYK based system that they're using for the print, which that can be calibrated so that your monitor does look like the final print, but the one you have at home almost certainly isn't calibrated to that standard. One concern I have with these specific images is that these have... What's that?
How dark they are?
They're a little bit... I mean, there's contrast. The contrast will look good in the print because there's bright sections and dark. The contrast will look good. But the shadows, those might look a bit muted. You might not see the detail in the shadows that you're seeing when you're looking on a computer monitor. But the other thing is there's quite a few little specular highlights, small, bright lights in these images. And those are not going to look like small bright lights on your monitor. On your monitor, those are sources of light. Light is emitting into your eyes from the screen for those little pinpoints of light. With a poster, it's reflected light and the panels are not glossy. So it's not going to have a pop to those little lights. You know, you always have to think of the flat, matte white that the fabric started as. That is the brightest thing that can ever be in that poster. The basic matte white of the poster, that's the brightest, and everything else is darker than that. So if you're looking for like a pop of light, it's not going to look like a glossy poster with a spotlight on it. It's not going to look like a monitor that's emitting light. It's a matte white, and that's the brightest it could be. So things to consider. I have found in trying to just get a half decent idea. iPhone screens are pretty color accurate. So the colors are not miles apart if you're viewing it on an iPhone screen. And then if you turn the screen brightness, I would say down to about 1/6 of the screen brightness slider, which when you then hold that up at some kind of distance from your face, you're like, that's kind of dim. But that's about what the poster, you know, the printed fabric ends up looking like, because the fabric is not emitting light and it is matte. It's not glossy. So when you see that, you might go, oh, that image is actually quite a bit duller, of course, than what it looks like on my computer monitor. Now, again, you can use some photo manipulation, right? Manipulate the software to brighten the image. That type of thing can be done beforehand, but you kind of need to have the monitor set to the correct standards to manipulate the image that way. So I have a little bit of hesitation with these specific images, because if what you really loved about them was the detail in the shadows and the little pops of light, I'm like, that's going to get muted by the printing process. There's not really much question about those two things.
So in general, he asks, would simpler images look better? These two stock photos are quite intricate, so is that something to avoid in order to get the best looking panels? Like Rob said, these are not emitting light, so I don't know what you mean by simpler, but I mean,
just larger solid color shapes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, so my panels are those. And we've shown them on the podcast before. They're photographs of paintings basically that Andrew's wife did, and it's mostly just grays, reds, blacks, and a little bit of whites. Yeah. So they are fairly simple.
Right. They're like blocks of color. They're not really fine little details.
So I don't really have a really good way of telling you with it, how they compare with something that's a little bit more intricate. But I think yes, I mean these are panels that are essentially like the printing process is impregnating the fabric with ink. Yeah. That's how it works. So anything that's really small, is very hard to do really super accurately.
Although it's pretty darn good in GIC's printing process. They're pretty darn good at that.
You know what you can do? So I don't know if you guys have them in India, but here there are tons of places that you can go and have not screen what do they call it? The silk screening T-shirts. But there are places that have printers that do this. And you can have, them print you a sample basically and see how it looks. I mean, it will cost you money. It's not going to be free, but then you would have it in your hand. You would actually have the image in your hand at the size that you're kind of looking at. most of them can do that for you. They're used to printing on T-shirts, but most of them will also do like bags and mouse pads and a bunch of other stuff. So they have the ability to do it, but make sure that they are not doing silk screening. They are actually doing the printing, because that process is, I mean, there's only a couple of companies that sell those printers, and I'm pretty sure that's what Gic's using. I mean, I don't think that they invented a new way of doing it.
So all I would say, like, I'm not too worried about the intricacy of the image, like, smaller details in that. That's not the big concern for me. The main thing is just that it is a matte finish. It is a matte finish. So imagine the difference, right? When you print a photo at home on your printer on regular matte white paper versus glossy photo paper.
Yeah.
That's what you got to keep in mind, that it's going to look more like the matte white paper. So anything
the colors will be a lot more accurate though.
Well, yeah,
when you print them at home.
But I just mean that sort of finish and the sort of the brightness of it, right?
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, like, because there are images where you print them on the matte white paper and you're like, that still looks really good because what the image is turns out well even on a matte white. You got to keep that same thing in mind. Something where you're like, this is really only going to look good if it's glossy. That's not going to look good on printed fabric. That's the thing to keep in mind.
Okay. All right, that's it for him. John, what's the most preferred type of bookshelf speaker cabinet? Sealed, ported, or passive radiator? Assuming you have subwoofers to handle the deep bass, what's best? And can you mix for different speaker positions, or is it better to stick with one type for every position in the room? Can I be dead honest with you? Every time I look at speakers or even think about speakers or suggest speakers, the port is almost always never a consideration for me. The only time I worry about Violet, cut it, stop it. The only time I can consider the port is when it's a placement thing. That's the only time I worry about ports. So, is there a most preferred type of bookshelf speaker? No. I mean, you can make a good sealed, you can make a good ported, and you can make a good passive radiator. They all exist out there. We've recommended all three in different situations for different people, or people have said, I've got this one, it's got this type of cabinet or this type of, a port. Does it make a difference? And we've always said no.
And can a mix be used? A mix can absolutely be used. It can definitely be used. The only time where I would say that I have an opinion about this and preferring one over the other, going back to those sonotube subs that we were talking about a few questions ago, if you're doing it yourself. If you're building it yourself, I err on the side of sealed, just because calculating exactly what the port should be, you got to know what you're doing. I don't know how to do that, honestly. I mean, I know there are programs online. You can put in all of your parameters and it'll spit out a number and you'll probably be okay following that, but I don't actually know how to work that out for myself. So for DIY, I would err on the side of sealed, just because you can't really mess that up too much. As long as you have proper power handling and enough power to drive them, you can't really mess up sealed DIY. But a properly designed speaker, it can be sealed, ported, passive radiator, dual opposed drivers, whatever you want to do. Properly designed, they can all sound fantastic, and you can mix and match them as long as the other parameters, the actual measurements of the sound, you don't have wildly different timbre or dispersion or something.
Every time we talk about this kind of internal volume, cabinet volume of, in calculating ports and all this other stuff, I always think about the people who are like, oh, I know that I need this much air in there, blah, blah, blah. Like, are you taking into account the bracing? Are you taking, I think about all the other stuff. Like, the only way you really, like, in my mind, the only way you can really know what internal volume you actually have of air is to put it in a program and then, design it and then have it calculate, factoring out all the bracing and the size of the port and the back of the driver and everything else. I mean, I know that you can approximate.
You could calculate it out, sure.
Probably good enough, but I'm always like, you don't really know exactly. You don't really know. So he's pretty darn certain he's going to get the 8-inch monoprice alpha in-ceiling speakers for his overheads. Monoprice sells matching metal back cans for the intended ceiling installation. But what if you make your own enclosure for them? What internal volume should the enclosure have, and how deep does it need to be? So depth, I don't think, is really a factor here.
Nope.
It doesn't really matter. I mean, the depth has to be enough that you can fit the driver, the speaker into it. Past that, the depth is not important. It is the internal volume. And I mean, you could try to calculate this, but I'm absolutely certain Monoprice has either told you in their manual or will tell you if you ask them how much volume should be back there.
I mean, the honest answer is almost anytime you ask about any in-wall speakers, including in ceilings and building an enclosure, the safe bet is 1 cubic foot. You almost can't go wrong with 1 cubic foot of volume because, again, we're building a sealed enclosure. So it's simply a matter of that's going to be enough air that you're not constricting the movement of the driver, but not so much air that it's going to cause any type of problem with resonance inside, as long as you have, padding inside there. So if you just aim for 1 cubic foot, and the depth doesn't matter too much. If you've got only 3.5 inches of depth because it's going in a standard wall bay, then that's going to be 2 feet high. That's what's going to end up equaling out when you've got 16 inch on center. So it's pretty easy to just build that, and you're going to be very safe.
So he's pretty darn set on getting high-efficiency bookshelf front speakers. On our previous advice, he's strongly considering the HSU for the front three, the CCB8 model in particular. But he already owns a Klipsch Reference 2 series center. That series has been discontinued for several years now. But he might be able to find out a pair of Reference 2 bookshelf speakers if he keeps looking. Any advice on which path to pursue? I'm looking at these. What are these coaxial?
They are coaxial. They are not concentric. It is actually not. It's not exactly a compression tweeter that's down the throat of the driver there, but the throat of the driver with the little, instead of a phase plug or a dust cap, that's acoustically transparent in the middle of the driver, and the tweeter is down in there, so that's acting as a horn for the tweeter.
Right.
Yeah.
How much are these things? I don't know.
They're not crazy expensive. They're what, $700 for a pair?
Yeah, $450 each. Oh, that's a real wood. Oh, sorry, I clicked on the wrong one.
No, I'm pretty sure they're $700 for the pair. If you're buying them as a pair. So, yeah, I mean, I guess to me it would be: are you in love with your Reference 2 center speaker? Because if you're absolutely in love with it, the HSUs sound different. They sound different than the Klipsch Reference 2. So if you are absolutely in love with your Klipsch Reference 2 center, then I would keep an eye. Because, I mean, there were lots of Klipsch Reference 2 speakers sold. So coming across a pair of Reference 2 bookshelf speakers, or if you can afford the price, matching it with the new Reference 3, because that's the series that replaced it. Although they're not cheap. They're expensive. The Reference 3 are expensive speakers. But yeah, finding some Reference 2 bookshelf speakers I don't think is out of the question. But if you're like, I actually want a different sound than my current center, well then get the HSUs. Absolutely. That's about all I can answer on that one.
Yeah, I don't understand this. I don't see that there is a... So they're $700. So the CB8, the satin black are $700 a pair, but it's discontinued. The satin black with black cone each is $370 each.
Oh, okay.
But they're on back order.
Yeah.
And the real wood veneer pairs are discontinued, and the real wood.
I guess
veneer,
they got rid of those yellow drivers that nobody liked.
No, the real wood veneer rose with a yellow cone each is $450, but that's the only one, and that's on back order as well. So you may not be able to order these full stop.
That's true.
Right now.
Yeah, right now. So
it may be the case that you're just waiting to see what HSU does with these speakers, and while you do, you look for some Klipsch.
Yep.
So I don't see you getting these speakers. I'm glad that you're excited about them, but I'm sorry to tell you that you can't have them. Not right now.
Not right now. Yeah.
So, tying back to his earlier question, whatever he ends up getting for his front three speakers are going to be too large and too expensive to use 4 more of them as identical surrounds and surround backs. For those positions, he still wants a bookshelf speaker form factor, but something more compact and less expensive, and they'll also be close to the walls behind them. So he thought, one thought he had was just to use more of the same Monoprice Alpha in-ceiling speakers, but make his own sealed cabinets for them and use those as surrounds and surround backs. But would it be easier to buy Monoprice Encore bookshelf speakers? Would they match well with everything else? In the end, what do we think he should get for surround and surround backs? And Rob's already linked to the thing that I was going to say, which is if you're going to end up with either of these options, You can get the HSU, the horn-loaded one.
The HP1. HP1 Mark II. Now, the HP1 Mark II does have a port on the back, but stick a couple of inches of acoustic treatment behind them and wall mount them on top of that, and that's really not an issue. These can still be very close to the boundary. You need a little bit of air. You don't, wouldn't slap them against the hard wall and block the port, but they don't need much. I mean, an inch and a half, honestly, is all you need for that port. So I'm not worried about the rear port on the back of the HP1s at all. I almost certainly would get those for anything that you want. I wouldn't, in your instance, suggest going with the Monoprice Encore because they're actually fairly inefficient speakers. They have high power handling, but they're actually fairly inefficient. They're kind of the opposite, and you might have some trim level issues trying to get those matched with whatever high efficiency front speakers you get. So I'd go for the HSUs for your surrounds and surround backs. That's the easy answer, and they'll match up pretty nicely with anything that you might be getting for your fronts.
Yeah, these don't say they're back ordered or anything.
That's right. Yeah, those ones are available.
They're $170.
You might get the HC ones for your front three if those CCB8s just aren't coming back in stock, because the HC ones, even though in the images they're horizontal for a center, in the manual it describes how to rotate the tweeter 90 degrees so that you can use them vertically, and that'll get you the higher output and power handling for the front three channels, the HC1 Mark II.
Right. All right, Jonathan in the CDEN 4.0. So there you go. What's happening here? Did I do something? All right.
No, I'm just typing.
Jonathan is thrilled with how the renovation turned out. The audio is great, and he loves having a second row of seats on a riser. The front wall and ceiling were painted black, and he loves the effect. On the front wall, he's mounted 3 TVs, a 77-inch OLED, which does not look that big in these images.
From the very back of the room.
From the very back of the room. It doesn't look that big, but I know it is big. OLED in the middle as the main display, 8.5 feet from the front row, and 2 42-inch LCDs on either side for a sports bar type of setup. Which
got 3 games going all at once.
Drives me nuts, but whatever. I mean, he's a Seahawks fan,
That's
so
right.
how many games does he need to watch at the same time? Just he needs to watch the one.
Got to see the competitors and how they're doing.
Anyways, what is that up there above the left thing? Oh, it's a vent. Okay, so the walls looks like black or gray, and he's got blue panels because that's Seahawks. And he's got a nice cylinder sub in the back because he's a good AVRanter. But now that the room feels like a proper theater, he can't help but feel he ought to have a projection set up. The room is 14 feet wide, but all of the seating is offset a little bit to the right so that there's a comfortable walkway going along the left side of the room. Since he's already sitting quite close to in the front row, he's considered a drop-down screen that would go in front of the existing TVs and maybe go in front of the speakers too. The screen would have to be acoustically transparent in that case, of course, but a drop-down setup would be so close, and he didn't think it would look right. So he's actually thinking he should replace the OLED with, say, a 100-inch projection screen. And if that screen is also offset to the right, just like his seats, he could still have room for the 42-inch TVs to the left, one above the other, rather than flanking on either side. Do we think replacing the OLED with a projection screen would be a good idea? His initial thought is to mount the projector behind the second row of seats, which would mean he would have to make some holes in the ceiling for an HDMI cable and power line run, so it's not a trivial thing. And would 100 inches be an appropriate size with 8.5 feet eyes to screen? I think if you're going to do this, which I see no reason why you can't do it.
Okay.
I again wanted to reference last podcast where we talked about if you want blacks like OLED blacks, you need an OLED, and you will not get it from a projector. So I just want to remind you that if you go with a projector setup, you are not going to get blacks. You're going to get really dark gray blacks. But I would go with a short throw projector and put it up at the front of the room so that you don't have to do all the rest of that stuff you just talked about. That, because they can do 100 inches just fine. Is 8 feet to that screen an issue? I think it's an issue.
I mean, that's bigger than 45 degrees, but a lot of people like a little bit bigger than 45 degrees. So I mean, if you were 8.5 feet, then you'd be looking at 95 inches would give you exactly 45 degrees more or less. So you're not wildly larger than that. So that's not the issue there. But yeah, if you did ultra short throw, and I actually have a suggestion for that. Because one of the concerns I have here is that when we're looking at the images, he's got a fan. He's got a ceiling fan.
Yeah,
so
I have one too. It sucks.
If you did have the projector at the back of the room, then the projector has to be lower than the ceiling fan. And
the screen, that's where...
And the top edge of the screen has to be lower than the ceiling fan. And your height of the ceiling is already a little bit lowered, and you have a riser on the back row. I'm like, we're getting pretty squishy for whether or not this is going to end up casting a shadow from that ceiling fan. And it doesn't look like that ceiling fan was chosen by accident, the look of it. It looks like that was intended to be in this room and probably not removed. So ultra short throw might be the only logistical way to get this to work really well. Now, you could get, in your instance, we're not worried about ambient light rejecting for the screen because the room is blacked out. You've got full light control. He's using the projector in a dark environment, so you can have a standard white screen with an ultra short throw projector. And in your case, that would allow you to even mount the ultra short throw projector on the ceiling if you wanted to, so that it's not on a stand sticking out into the room where you're already fairly close when you're reclined. You don't want your legs bumping into it or something or feeling like they're going to. So you could ceiling mount ultra short throw, but the black level is not going to be anything close to what you've gotten used to with your OLED. No. It's just, it's gray. Like, just flat out, it's gray. The black wall is going to reveal that the black on your screen is not blacks black anymore. Yes. So here's what I'm thinking, because I get what you're saying. You know, the feel of it. You're like, wouldn't it just feel right to have a big projection screen when it's movie time in here? Because from the back row, that 77-inch OLED doesn't look like a movie screen. It looks like a TV from the back row. And he's like, I could have the big projector in here. I still think you can make a roll down screen work in here, because I just don't love the idea of getting rid of the 3 TV setup that you already have and invested so much into and love for your sports experience. I don't love the idea of getting rid of that in favor of a projection screen. I like adding a projection screen to this.
I like that better too.
It can be a roll down white screen. I don't think you actually need to go acoustically transparent, because you've got enough room. Even if you don't move that center, you could lower the center speaker a little bit, but even if you don't, there's enough room in there that certainly a 92-inch, because the thing is, it is going to be closer, right? It's not going to be 8.5 feet flush mounted to the front wall. It's going to be 8 feet and come down in front. I think those front speakers might need to go just a little bit wider, but that's okay. They're on stands. There's nothing preventing the front speakers from going a little bit wider. Maybe the center speaker needs to be lowered a little bit, but I don't think very much at all. And I think you have a 92-inch motorized or even manual pull down if you want to save money, come down in front of the 77-inch OLED. And then, I think maybe we go ultra short throw for the projector to avoid any issues with the ceiling fan. That's what I'm thinking here. I don't think you need to go acoustically transparent. I don't think you need to make a ton of changes.
So he says gaming is not a concern, just movies, TV shows, and sports. His budget would be more like what an Epson 5050 UB cost rather than the JVC projectors. And he was actually thinking he could sell his OLED to offset most of the cost. So Rob doesn't want you to do that. No. So given all, I honestly think if you get a projector and sell your OLED, you will not be happy.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that. And this is one of the things I fear personally for myself, is that if I get an OLED or if I get a screen in here, and going back to the projector is going to be very hard for me. And so therefore I am committed to sticking with the projector until I don't have to stick with until I can get a big enough screen. So
98-inch LCD.
Yeah. So given all of that, which projector model and screen would we recommend? So since you don't have to go with a ambient light rejecting screen because of everything that's going on in here, and you could definitely save this for only like movie nights and stuff like that. The 100-inch screens from Silver Ticket and everybody else are just, I have a Silver Ticket.
If you're doing motorized roll down, I would probably point you to Elite. Because the Elite screens are not crazy expensive. Right. And for the motor, like they have nice tensioned motorized roll down, just the Cine White fabric. That's all you need from them. They're regular Cine White. Because like I say, I don't think you need to go acoustically transparent.
I immediately forgot we were doing roll down.
Yeah.
I was thinking
if he's doing the replace, it wouldn't be. So then I would go Silver Ticket. But if we're doing roll down, I'd go Elite screens. Because that's not crazy. We're not asking you to increase the budget ridiculously to go with an Elite screens for the roll down. So I just prefer those when it's going to be roll down. Because they they have the nice tensioned version, and the Cinewhite fabric is really good. For the projector, like I say, I think I kind of like the ceiling mounted ultra short throw. I would point you to LG. In fact, I think I might point you to LG regardless in this particular instance. The Epson 5050 UB, it does have like versus everything else that's less expensive than the JVCs, it does have really nice, good black levels, but it's still stuck back at 1080p. It's wobbling the panel twice per frame, so you're not getting 4K resolution. Its HDR is like, it's pretty good, but it's not dynamic tone mapping, no frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. LG's projectors, while the absolute black level is not as good as the Epson 5050 UP, gotta be warned, you're taking a black level hit no matter what you're doing, but they've got LG's frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, full 4K resolution. It's actually a 1080p panel, but it's being used 4 times per frame. So the HDR looks better on the LGs. It's laser light engine, so you're going to have, the faster startup time and the longer lifespan and that. So they have an ultra short throw for $4,500. That's the HU85LA. I checked in the manual, and it is one that can be inverted and mounted on the ceiling. Wouldn't want to use it with an ambient light rejecting screen that way, but with a standard white screen, going to work just fine. So I'm kind of keen on that, although, the price, $4,500, is not super cheap, but there's not anything less expensive that would do better here. And then if you want the standard throw, that would be the HU810. That's the standard throw version. They're basically the same projector. It's just one is ultra short throw and one is standard throw. But do be advised that if you go for the 92-inch size that I talked about, the farthest that the lens can be, given the zoom range that's available, is 13 feet 11 inches. So that's going to be right above the second row. It's not going to be behind the second row. It's going to be right above it. So just be aware of that, because that's where the lens would be. 13 feet 11 inches, basically 14 feet. Then there's the body of the projector behind that. So that's going to be directly overhead if you go with that. I kind of like the ultra short throw.
This is tab tensioned. Yeah, so there's a 91-inch screen from Elite Screens that I will link up here. And it's not, I don't think it's tab tensioned, but it is motorized.
Okay.
And it's like $300.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. It's crazy to even think of that. But and it's just a regular old white screen. Yep. So I mean, if you're not having it, he does have a vent back there, which may require you to take that into consideration. You can, as far as tab tensioned or not, you may want to spend a little bit extra on that.
Yeah.
All right, Rob, who do we have left?
Okay, let me transition out of the images here. We have Brian and Jason, and I put a bunch of photos in there, so I'm scrolling past that. Also lots of questions from Jason. Julian, let's see, a couple more. Mike T and Bertrand. There we go. That's everybody that's on the list. We put a dent in it.
We put a dent. That's what we do. If you want to get your question added to the list, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Sean for sending us a donation over at avrant.com and clicking on that buy us a cup of coffee link. That PayPal donation is very appreciated, as well as our 136 patrons over at patreon.com, including Bertrand. So thank you to all of you.
Yes, Sean, thank you very much for the PayPal donation. Really do appreciate that. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can go to sign up for an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to. Big thanks to our 136 patrons over there. Bertrand, thank you for being one of them.
I also want to thank Karl for sending me a suggestion over at AV Gadgets, as well as some notes of gratitude from Rohan, Jay, Mike, Gurinder, other Mike, and Bertrand.
Yes, indeed. Karl, thanks for helping out Tom with AV Gadgets, trying to boost the readership there, increase Tom's workload, but that's what you gotta do to get the readers. And then we very much appreciate those notes of gratitude and encouragement from Rohan, Jay, Mike S, Gurinder, Mike T, and Bertrand. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com.
AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.